Hi, my name is Pete Krutoff. I'm the PTL for the OpenStack UX project. Today, we're going to be talking about the OpenStack Client Validation Study. In addition to myself, Stan Lee with IBM, Ju Lim with Red Hat, and Dean Troyer with Intel also participated in this study. So why this matters, and um, consistency, has been, well, consistently identified as an issue in the user survey. And the OpenStack client actually goes a long way to resolving some of these issues. So for our high-level executive summary, um, the first thing it's important to point out is that operators immediately recognize the value of the OpenStack client. And this was something that was not prompted. So we weren't actually asking operators whether they recognize the value. This is something they sort of said randomly when they were in the study with us. But we did find that one barrier to adoption was the lack of commands that have been added. And that's fairly significant in my opinion because if all the commands aren't there, then it becomes too easy to go back to the individual project APIs. Um, we also wanted to point out that none of the tasks actually rated lower than a 3 on a 1 to 5 scale, where 5 is very easy. Um, and in addition, operators did want to improve help. Um, Frankly, that's not exclusive to OSC. So if you do look at the user survey, what you'll notice is people consistently complain around help as well as documentation. Now, frankly, between us, it's really more of an information architecture issue than specific to help and documentation. So the study design. So first of all, what is the OpenStack client? What did we do? So the way I like to think about the OpenStack client is that it's sort of the client to rule them all. It's essentially a common command line client for OpenStack that brings together things like compute, identity, image, object storage together into a single shell. So what did we do? Um, we asked 10 operators to complete 6 common tasks using the client. And these are tasks that we've talked to operators about before um, that are fairly consistent in what they do every day. So they'd be things like adding new users to the cloud, adding members to a project, adjusting quotas, that sort of thing. So as part of the study design, we did have some preliminary questions. For example, we just wanted to understand if they'd actually used the OpenStack client in the past. If so, how often do they use the client? And of course, we talked a little bit about the release of OpenStack that they were using, as well as what interfaces that they were using to operate OpenStack. Whether that's a CLI, API, GUI, or frankly, the OpenStack client. So during the study, again, what we did is asked operators to complete a common set of tasks using the OpenStack client. What they included was create a new project, add new users to an OpenStack cloud, add users to a project, add users to a new user group, set quota, and add email addresses for a user. And the way these, at the end of each task, we asked them whether or not they were able to complete the task, rate the difficulty on a scale of 1 to 5. And we also had an open ended question in there to describe why they provided the answer they did. The way we did the study is we essentially created a survey um, where in the survey you would be fed a project at a time, or rather, excuse me, a task at a time. And once they completed the task, what it did is it displayed, for example, whether they're able to complete the task. Um, So the study itself was relatively automated, and the researchers were really in the room just to answer any questions, or if the participants got to a point where they were so stuck that they need our help backing out. In addition, we did ask some follow-up questions. And there were general things like, what frustrated you the most about this overall experience? How would you improve the OpenStack client? What did you like? What did you think about help? That sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the overall results. Um, this presentation does do a deeper dive on the results, um, but the current thinking is that we don't want to take too much time in this video, so we're just going to give it overall results. If you want any more specificity, there will be a link to the presentation. You can go through there and dig into the data. So in terms of overall results, have you used the OpenStack client? And 8 of the 10 participants did use the OpenStack client. In terms of how often they used it, though, a lot of people answered occasionally. Very, very few people. In fact, one person said they use it frequently. Um, and again, there was only one person that said they never used it. So, which release of OpenStack are you using? Again, most of the people were using Kilo. And in terms of other project interfaces, what's sort of interesting is that number is actually fairly well spread out, from the API, CLI, the GUI, and the OpenStack client. And I think one of the things you may want to notice about this is there's sort of an assumption within the community that if you're a seasoned operator, you don't use the graphical user interface, but we didn't really find that from this study, at least not, and frankly, in more of a peripheral manner. We didn't dive down on them on this, but just in terms of summary statistics. So in terms of results, um, in this slide, we're actually looking at the individual tasks. So again, adding a new project, adding new users, adding users to a project, creating a new user group, set quota, and add an email to the user. And in this case, it's ease of use. So a rating of number 1 would mean that they felt it was very difficult. A rating of 5 meant that they felt it was very, very easy. And what you'll notice from this slide is that in general, the ratings were very high. And in fact, the lowest rating was still better than average. And that was add users to project. Um, and in that case, the reason we found that is in some ways in OpenStack, you're almost adding roles to a project than users. Or to put it another way, um, you have to assign the user a role before you can add them to a project. And what we were finding is that operators got a little bit confused around the whole use of roles as part of the command line. So again, this is consistent. We did have 2 people that were unable to add a user to a project. Um, Again, it wasn't a significant number, right? 2 of the 8, but it was enough that it was noticeable, and clearly it was the most challenging task of all 6. So, what frustrated you most about this experience? So, now we're into the follow up questions. And generally, operators didn't feel that the OpenStack client was frustrating. Um, and, again, we have somebody here. These are quotes from the study. And for example, somebody said overall the experience was very good. Um, we did get some comments that they did want to improve help. And what we're finding is the help is actually there. What we need to do is perhaps to be a little bit better explaining it at how you access help in the CLI. And one of the things that you were finding from a few people is they felt like it was maybe a little bit too verbose, maybe too much of an overview of all of the commands when you're really trying to dive a little deeper in one specific one. And so how would you improve the OpenStack client? Again, they wanted to see some examples, and that could be in the documentation. I think the thinking in this case is that if you provide a few good examples, and it goes a long way towards teaching newbies how to use the client. And somewhat related is they do want better documentation on the help pages. And again, one of the things that you could do is add examples, which would be fairly significant for users. So what did you like about this experience? And I understanding I'm repeating myself, but it's really about consistency again. It's the frustration that the APIs don't always have the different calls in the projects. And they liked that the OpenStack client was consistent. So if we could improve the help, how would you expect it to appear? So operators wanted the list of available help to be shorter. And again, it was possible to make that list shorter. What we found is that operators didn't understand how to do a context sensitive search for help. And again, so from our perspective, it's more of an education thing than actually fixing the feature itself. And they also wanted more information for the commands. So, one way to think about this is they wanted that list of commands to be shorter when they were searching for help. But when they did land on a command, they wanted a little more detail than they were getting. So was the command structure easy to learn or use? So despite, some of the comments that we got around help, 10 of 10 people say that they felt it was easy to learn or use. And again, and I feel like again I'm repeating myself. Why was the command structure easy or difficult to learn? And again, operators has commented that they like the consistency and consolidation into a single client. And I think what they're getting at to some extent is it's much easier to learn a common set of commands within one client than learning commands across multiple clients that are in some cases different, right? Because then you're having to relearn APIs. So are there additional tasks that you would like to perform in the OpenStack client? So 3 of the 10 people said there were. And, again, that kind of goes to our earlier point that one barrier to adoption of the OpenStack client is really the lack of commands or the need to add additional commands. Otherwise, it's too easy just to go back to the project APIs. Here's a list of tasks that they wanted to add. I'll let people take a look at the presentation to understand specifically which ones there are. Um, Frankly, they are the usual suspects. And finally, do you plan to use the OpenStack client after today, based on your experience during the study? And again, we got a whopping 10 out of 10. Again, people really like the OpenStack client, other than maybe some tweaks to help and continuing to add commands to it. So that's the end of the presentation. If you want greater detail, we are planning to post it and include the link on the YouTube page. And you're certainly welcome to go in there and dive a little bit deeper. So I appreciate your time and thanks so much for watching.